This video is about relationships, and as we dive into the whole relationships section, we're going to be defining what relationships means and what relational peace means. And you can be following along in your PDF workbook that we have quite a few activities for this section that you're going to be able to go through as you start to come up with what these words mean for you and how they apply in your life. This is the first video in the relationships section, so we're just going to be establishing quite a few details about relationships and how they function before we dive into particular relationships with higher power, with yourself, and with others, and even with things and food. We're also going to be talking about setting boundaries, having realistic expectations, intentionality, selectivity, everything having to do with how we interact with others, whether it be really close, tight-knit relationships or just passing associational acquaintances. So to start off, everything that we're going to be talking about with relationships will all be based in this foundation that we create of what the definition is. What does relationships even mean? So there's an activity in your workbook that will help you to start to determine what it is for you. How would you define that? How would you explain a relationship to, let's say, to a child? How would you put it into very simple terms? So take a moment and really just start to think for yourself, how would you define the word relationship? What does it mean to you? And as you start to formulate for yourself what that definition is, what I want you to do is just scratch the surface a little bit about other angles, other perspectives that you could look at the word relationship. For example, the word relationship that we have comes from two roots. We have which means to go back or revisit. It means to go back in your mind or even go back physically, go back in your memories. Latus. The other piece of the word that creates relationship is the word latus. And latus, L-A-T-U-S, literally means to carry. It means to burden. It means to mourn or to grieve with someone who's mourning or grieving. It means to understand, to forgive, to embrace with empathy, to embrace with sympathy. Those are all words and definitions geared around this same core structural meaning of latus, which means to carry. So in your mind, start to let that lend some insight and some perspective when it comes to how you define, how you choose to define the word relationship. And when you think about the word relationship from here on out, let it register on a literal level of relatus. How is it that I'm going back in my mind to this person or this thing or this group or this association point? And how am I either becoming willing to carry or allowing myself to be carried? And that's the exchange we want to be revisiting in our mind anytime we think about the word relationship. Relatus. Go back and figure out a way to carry this person or to let yourself be carried by this person. And it might be difficult to know how exactly to approach this in your mind. For example, if you have a rift with someone or there's some discord going on, there's some struggle, some fight, there's some kind of dispute, let yourself think of ways that you've allowed this person to carry you in the past, or think of ways that you might become willing to carry this person moving forward if circumstances were to be different. For example, the easiest analogy is to use a mother and a son or mother and daughter. You have an individual who was willing to carry this baby in her womb, for example, to carry him or her for the entirety of the pregnancy, and then to carry this infant for every second that the infant needed to be carried throughout the course of this infant learning to walk, learning to function, learning to act on its own. The mother was doing a lot of carrying. And sometimes we literally have to go back that far in a relationship to remember that we were carried by this person. This person was there for us when we needed them. When we were most vulnerable, this person was able to step in. And sometimes we discount that reality, that piece of our relationship. We forget that that was a part of our relationship. So whatever it means to you, go back in your mind and figure out a moment when you were willing to carry this person, or when they were willing to carry you, and there was much more understanding, there was much more sympathy, much more empathy. And when those things are present, sometimes that gives us a starting point from where we can build and we can start to create a new relationship based on relatus, based on this understanding that we were willing to carry each other and we can become willing to carry each other once again. When it comes to this whole concept of latus and being willing to carry and being vulnerable to be carried, it's all about a concept of exchanging willingness and availability, exchanging vulnerability for trust. And knowing that we can trust someone, that they're going to be gentle with us. And for a lot of people, that's a really difficult exchange. They've been burned in the past, they've been hurt, they've been dropped, literally, they've been left, they've been forgotten, and they have these really deep wounds that keep resurfacing, wounds that are affecting everything in the present and moving forward. And it's hard to detach from some of those memories and some of those relational mishaps or points of discord. In the workbook, we have a few questions that can help stir a little bit of curiosity and stir some memories geared around when we were willing to be vulnerable and when we were open to relationships, when we were willing to be carried, when we were willing to carry others. And if we can go back to those places in our minds and find out where disconnects happened and where hurt and pain stepped in, sometimes we can redefine things in a different light, let ourselves see things a little bit differently, utilizing all of this knowledge and wisdom that we've gathered along the way between then and now. Sometimes we can go back to that place in our mind and reframe the context, help ourselves to understand that things aren't necessarily the way that we thought they were. We have more understanding now. We have more insight about this other person, and we have more context that we can really lean in and create a proper perspective, proper relational perspective about what's really going on. And sometimes the most pivotal answers will be found in questions such as, if I were capable of carrying this person who I'm not willing to carry, or if I was willing to be carried by this person, if I was willing to let myself be vulnerable with this person, what might that look like? What might that feel like? And if I were to show up entirely understanding and forgiving and empathetic and sympathetic toward this person, if I were to understand that they're fighting a battle just like I'm fighting, and perhaps their battle is more difficult than mine, if I showed up in that way with those types of feelings and emotions, what might that bring about? What might that cause to stir in the life of this other person? How might that change the relationship that we have, that we're communicating one with another? As people start to dig deep with these types of questions, with a lot of introspection, often it's a question of boundaries, and what boundaries were properly set, and which ones were perhaps loosely set, not necessarily communicated properly, how many boundaries needed to be set beforehand, and which ones were actually in motion, which ones were assumed. There are a lot of questions we can ask ourselves about the creation of boundaries and about the setting of proper boundaries, things that should have been communicated far, far in advance before anything showed up. And as difficult as it is to revisit that conversation later on once boundaries have been broken or crossed, it's still a very necessary process, and it's something that we all need to be recircling back to and re-strengthening along the way. And sometimes it's just implementing an understanding of something that's a new concept to us. For example, when we talked about the difference between choice and decision, and being able to make a choice and then change our mind, and it's okay because choices come and go, options come and go. But with decisions, if we can treat our decisions with the respect they deserve, knowing that we have made a decision that is ironclad, that helps hold us to our own level of accountability, it helps us remember that we literally killed off other options to us because we chose to make a decision rather than a choice. And if we can remember that decisions apply to boundaries much more so than choices, then it will remind us that we've made a decision in our mind to associate with this type of person, with this type of demographic. We've chosen to create a decision in our mind that allows us to kill off all other options because we want a certain lifestyle. We want to be treated a certain way. We want to be interacting with certain types of people. And we want to know that those that we bring very close to us will be of the same mind, the same intention, the same level of respect, the same level of honor and vulnerability, for example, because we simply made that decision in our mind far in advance, way beforehand. And that's how we can create intentionality moving forward, but only if we know enough about boundaries to be that intentional. And it's okay, we're learning new things, we're applying new concepts, and for us to step in really strong and intentionally to create boundaries the way they need to be created, to know that this is how I want to be treated, these are the types of people with whom I want to interact, and these are the ways that I'm going to extend myself to others. This is how I would like others to extend themselves to me. And if we can create as much of this content in our minds as possible beforehand, then we will have less incidents of being let down, less boundaries being crossed and being disrespected. And it all boils down to this level of communication and transparency, whether with ourselves or with others, us stating how we would like things to be moving forward, since we are half of the relationship with this other person. And sometimes it's within the relationship we carry with ourselves. And we're going to be bouncing between a lot of different contexts. For example, framing the relationship that we carry with ourselves, the relationship we have with a higher power and where we came from, relationships with those who are close to us, and then all of our associational relationships that are coming and going every day. There's a lot of different ways that we can approach relationships. This first video is intentionally just going to be framing and structuring the concept of relationship and how it is that we choose to function regardless of who it is that we're talking about, whether it's self or higher power or others or even things and food. So start to have that inner dialogue and that inner conversation about how do I arrive with relationships? What do I bring to the table? What are my expectations? What are my boundaries? What am I willing to put up with? And what is it that I absolutely will not tolerate? These are the types of things we have to ask ourselves so that we can set ourselves up for success within the future relationship, whether it's with a family member or a neighbor or a loved one or a husband or a wife. There are things that we can do now to create that framework and those boundaries and those structures, create that intentionality first, so that then we can create the potentiality for what it is that we want to have in the future with that person or with those people. And this ties in directly with expectations as well. When you think about expectations, if we don't communicate these expectations, the other person won't know what we want or need or what we assume or expect or what we think is going to show up. And then we're bound to be let down because they just don't know. They don't know what we're seeing in our mind or how we see it playing out. And along with the conversation of expectations, there needs to be a conversation about disappointment in general and what disappointment is. I'll never forget when I first learned this concept, and it changed the way that I approach relationships. It changed the way that I approach expectations. If you think about disappointment in your mind as simply having set an appointment that the other person didn't know about and couldn't show up for, was the only way that I could then arrive at the moment being disappointed. Literally having set an appointment in my mind that the other person didn't know about, my expectation was unrealistic. I set an appointment, but I didn't tell the other person about it. I didn't voice that expectation. And when they couldn't show up in the way that I thought they should or that I thought they could, I immediately assumed and made it mean that they were not doing as much as they could have, or that they were letting me down, or whatever story it is that I fabricated about it all, when underneath it all is just this simple having set an appointment and not having communicated it properly with the other person. So anytime you feel yourself in an atmosphere of disappointment, or you feel yourself expressing to someone your disappointment to them, keep in mind that perhaps you made that appointment without their permission, without having checked in with them and made sure that they knew about it. There's so many things that we can do as we just create this context of, have we communicated properly? Have we let this other person know what's in our mind and our heart about it? And if we're making appointments for people, are we informing them of what our expectation is about those appointments? Keep the communication of expectations free-flowing. Make sure that as you do have expectations and you recognize that you do have a legitimate expectation, communicate it to the other person. Communicate it to them and let them know that you have an expectation present. Is this realistic? Is this fair? Is this something that I can expect? Does it need to be changed a little bit? Does it need to be more flexible? Do I need to compromise? And the conversation will ebb and flow, and then it will create eventually this appointment in both of your minds that you can then know that we've agreed on this mutually. And this applies with the relational communication we have with others, but as well as with ourselves. There are certain expectations that we've made for ourselves, and we know that they're not realistic. We know that they're hard to meet, and that the deadline isn't achievable, and it's not something that we feel that we can do. And when we're unable to measure up to that deadline or to that expectation, we feel like we deeply let ourselves down. But it's just because we didn't communicate properly what the expectation was and what reality is. Sometimes we're holding ourselves to a much, much higher standard than anybody else would, and that's just not fair. We need to be able to treat ourselves in a way that is respectful and realistic, and is able to track progress and to give yourself applause when it's necessary, be able to pat yourself on the back, set gradual benchmarks, things that you can actually measure up to and meet requirements along the way. It needs to be doable. It needs to be sustainable. And we need to be able to be honest and realistic with what those expectations are, even if it's just within ourselves, with an internal dialogue. And when expectations are made, And when appointments have been set, we need to re-communicate those. We need to remind about those, whether it's reminding ourselves with little sticky notes or little reminders or notifications, or actually letting this other person know that, hey, remember, we have this thing we talked about that we decided, this is the expectation, this is the timeline, and just giving a friendly reminder so that there are less incidents of being disappointed on either end or on both ends. A lot of times when we dive into communicational issues or relational issues having to do with communication, there's often some type of a power struggle that's going on. There's some type of a fight for control, or a feeling of lack of control, or feeling out of control, or a feeling that there's a sense of dominance going on, that one person is wielding too much control over the other person. And these are things that must be communicated. They absolutely must be communicated. Because if we're not communicating about it, then there's this presence of depression going on about it. And we'll be diving into depression and anxiety and stress and those kinds of things in a future video. But just really simply holding back or holding in, not voicing, not speaking, not making clear, not communicating. And if we hold back too long, if we keep too many things within us, then the depression starts to really take root. And it starts to become something more than just a simple action of keeping things in or holding things back. So when you think about control, when you think about power struggle, remember that a lot of it applies to people who are holding themselves back from saying certain things that need to be said. And this is a conversation we'll be diving into later on, but just wanted to give you this piece of it. And when it's leaning more in the direction of domination and a struggle for control, struggle for power, communicate this. Let it be an open conversation, knowing that it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to feel that you're lacking a sense of power. It's okay to feel that you're out of control, and to communicate it neutrally, knowing that the other person may or may not receive it the way that we want them to, but that's aside from the point. The most important aspect, first off, is to know that we are communicating what we need to communicate, and that we're not stuffing it down pretending that it'll go away, because it won't. We have to be able to communicate what it is that we're feeling, knowing that we can stand our ground and that we're worthy of speaking that, and it's okay to be spoken. It helps us to frame within that context that we are able and willing to stand as a partner within this relationship, even if we're talking about a business relationship, or a relationship with your neighbor, or with your spouse, or with a loved one, a family member, a distant relative. There are lots of different kinds of relationships, but each relationship is able to be met with equality and with neutrality, knowing that we are both deserving of communication, we're both deserving of the ability to carry one another and to show up as vulnerable and to be heard and respected. And if both parties are able to show up in that way, then there will be much, much more communication, much more neutrality, there will be much more empathy, especially if it's met without pointing fingers and placing blame. Taking responsibility. It's one of the biggest first steps. And sometimes what the conversation facilitates is both parties being able to arrive at this much, much deeper place where there's some baggage, there's some hurt, there's some discord that's old. It's from a long time ago. It might be something that happened that the other person is entirely unaware of. So we have to dig deep in these types of conversations to find out, is there anything more to it? Is it really this circumstantial, insignificant moment? Is it this little trivial passing subject? Or is it really something that went much, much deeper into the past within this relationship of ours? Because it's likely that there's something more there that can be addressed and be worked through. When we know there's a conversation that has more to it, and there's a lot of things that need to be addressed, and there's potential baggage that's coming from the past, things that are going to be brought up that are possibly really difficult to navigate. If we know that that's the case, we can frame the entire context in this understanding that this other person wants recognition, they want assistance, they want support, they want love and respect, they want understanding, forgiveness, they want the types of things that we want. It's just possible that they're going about it in a little bit different way, and we're just not used to that. We're not conditioned in the ways that they were conditioned in their upbringing. We see things differently, we speak differently, we show up differently, we have different expectations, different boundaries, and we have to remember to be respectful of all of these things. But what we can do to meet them on their ground and to have an essentially the same water level, we can understand that they would like some applause for the hard work that they've put in, regardless of what that is or what it looks like or where it came from. We can show up as supportive, we can applaud them, we can notice their strengths and shine a light on them. We can validate, we can extend, we can be understanding, we can forgive, we can give an accolade or give some applause where it's needed or where it's benefited. We can do things to help lift and support this other person so that they know that we're coming at it from a place of love and respect and admiration, that we're trying to support and uplift the relationship instead of diving in with all of our tools blazing and trying to force change, trying to let them know that they've done something wrong and they need to admit it and they need to acknowledge it, placing blame and making them feel bad about it. There's a time and a place for everything, and all of it can be communicated properly, but we have to start within the context of love and admiration and respect and shining a light on the good things first. And this applies to any type of relationship, especially a relationship where we're coming in and we're trying to effectualize some type of change. We're trying to influence change. We're trying to bring things up to a higher level, higher standard. And we're trying to communicate to this other person that there are some changes that we'd like to see happen. And if we can focus on the good first, if we can shine a light on the things that they're doing right first, then they'll know that we are here to support them. We're here to help them. We're here to come alongside them and to be a partner with them and to make these changes together. And that we both have a hand in it, and that there are things that we can both do on either side of the relationship to strengthen it and to bring it together. And always communicate that there is some level of responsibility that we can take on ourselves, some level of responsibility or accountability to even assume, even if it's entirely out of place and it doesn't match the actual context. If we're able to assume at least some of the responsibility of the discord or the mishap or the injury or the miscommunication or whatever it was that caused the relationship to be strained, if we can assume some of that responsibility, even if it's really, really hard for us to swallow, even if it's such a sour pill that we feel that we're incapable of swallowing it, if we're able to get over that and to take on some of the responsibility, even if it's just assumed, it will show the other person that we are willing to meet them halfway, even if the entirety of the blame is in their court. If we can show up with a little bit more overarching compassion, knowing that their battle is rough, that they're having a hard time, they're struggling, and yeah, we're struggling too, but if we can take the higher road, they will follow that example, and they will do the same. They will step in and take some responsibility. And if both parties are eager to step in and take responsibility for whatever's happening, the relationship will mend and it will come back together far sooner than it would if both parties were only willing to dish out blame to the other person. And regardless of what the mishap or the miscommunication is, we always have to keep in mind that we each have our own tendencies. We all have our own upbringings. We have our own childhoods that we came from. We have our own sets of beliefs, our own conditioning that we've gone through our entire lives, the influences of others around us that have essentially created within us these stories and these beliefs and these self-concepts, and the concepts that we carry around that we impose on others, meaning that we add to circumstances, meaning and definitions that we add to certain words and phrases and slang, things that we allow to mean things that shouldn't necessarily be given so much weight in a relationship or in a conversation, yet we do. And it's just part of our tendencies, it's part of our predispositions, it's part of, like I said, our upbringings and the things around us that caused us to feel and act certain ways. And sometimes we're offering a little bit more understanding and generosity toward ourselves while we hold other people to a much, much higher level of standard. And if we can be as generous with others as we are with ourselves, demanding mercy for ourselves, for example, while we hold other people to fierce justice, if we can extend a little bit more of that mercy that we extend to ourselves and spread it out for others, it'll help the communication and the relational healing process be so much easier on a lot of different levels. And sometimes there are behaviors that are really stubborn, that are borderline on addictive or codependent behaviors, where people are showing up in a relationship a certain way and it's causing effect in the other person. It's causing the other person to react a certain way. And then one or both parties in the relationship is actually starting to notice that I feed on the reaction of this other person. And that's when it's starting to borderline on codependent behaviors, where we're relying on the other person's reaction to stir within us a similar reaction, and it goes back and forth. And this can also be found in relationships where we have enabling behaviors or literally crippling behaviors, where someone is helping too much and they're actually stifling the innate ability of someone to fend for themselves. or to be able to figure things out on their own. Or perhaps there's a smothering aspect going on where there's too much presence and too much focus, too much love and adoration. There is a point where we can have too much of a good thing. So frame within the context of your own relationships where some of these things may apply, and start to ask yourself some of those tougher questions. Is there some aspect of a pursuing and retreating cycle going on? Is there some personality type that's butting heads against yours because of the way that you disagree on certain things? There's a lot of questions we can ask ourselves and each other about how to look at this relationship, regardless of what type it is, to then start to mend it and heal it and make it stronger and better. And sometimes we have a story about ourselves, a story that's entirely fabricated either by us or by someone else, something that's been imposed on us, or some isolated moment that defined us because we allowed it to, or because we allowed someone's description of us to define us. There are things that we do along the way that don't necessarily make sense in the moment, but it was used as just an initial little coping mechanism or a coping tool just to get through that moment. And then we brought it with us as baggage, and we didn't even realize it. So think about how titles apply, things that you've said about yourself. Sometimes they're titles that we've allowed to become internalized, such as, oh, I'm high maintenance, or oh, I'm just moody, or I'm bipolar, or I'm difficult, or I'm broken, and I'm gonna let this person take care of me because they're so good at fixing broken things. In order for me to be loved by this person, I must always be broken. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. That if we create some title, or we have someone else fabricate a title for us to define us, and then everything we do and say is only based on that definition of ourselves, we'll notice that it's drastically limiting to who we can be, who we can potentially become, because it's such a small, isolated definition coming from a simple moment, instead of allowing ourselves to unfold into this potentiality of anything and everything that we could want to become. The way that we can show up in a million different scenarios and to be a different person in each scenario because each scenario is different. Instead, we allow ourselves to be defined by something insignificant, something so small and so demeaning, so limiting. So question the stories that others have made up about us. Question others' definitions for us. If someone is willing to tell us really quickly, oh, you're a certain way, you're an introvert, you're an extrovert, you're shy, you're outspoken, you're high maintenance, whatever that story happens to be, question it because it didn't come from you. And even if it did come from you, still question it. Ask yourself, is this something that's based in truth and fact about me personally and who I am? Or is this just an incredibly isolated moment that I only allowed to have definition and meaning because I leaned into it with such scrutiny or with such conviction about that moment? Maybe I dropped the ball and I feel bad about it, or maybe I showed up relationally in a way that I wasn't necessarily proud of. Whatever that moment created, try to see it with a little bit of introspection and understanding, and perhaps even a little bit of forgiveness about seeing us as who we are, knowing where we came from and how we understand ourselves to be, whatever that might be for you, and being able to lean in with a little bit more gentleness, a little bit more sincerity, a little more empathy, just like we talked about with this whole concept of relatus. How is it that we're able to go back to that moment and really carry ourselves and lift ourselves up? Because if we're able to do that for some isolated individuals, but maybe not so much for ourselves, it will start to ask some of those tougher questions. If I'm not willing to carry myself, why? Why is it that I'm so displeased with my performance or my results or my level of discipline? Whatever it is that I'm feeling I'm holding a grudge against. If it's about me personally, I need to dig much deeper to find out what's at the heart of this. What's causing this disrupt? What's causing this friction or this discord internally for the relationship that I could have with myself? This concept of relationship. Why am I unwilling to carry myself? And as we start to move into different definitions, different perspectives of how to see relationships, the relationships that we have with ourselves as well as with others, we'll start to learn that we're allowed to be selective, that we're allowed to be intentional. We're allowed to limit interaction with certain people, to speak differently, to allow ourselves to change. We are free to move and grow and advance and expand and progress. This is all within our grasp. It's all within our potentiality. Sometimes we just forget. So start to ask yourself, what would things look like if they were ideal? Miraculously, if I just woke up one morning and everything was as I would love it to be. Ideal best case scenario, best future reality that I could conjure and create and paint in my mind. If that were possible, what might that look like? What might that feel like? And what would I do with the kind of reality that would make me so happy and so joyful? If we can start to visualize this reality, then we will start to bring it into our reality. We can actually experience the frequency of that energy and that vibration, and then it will start to materialize and show up for us. But only if we can visualize it, only if we can start to create it in our mind and give ourselves permission to paint it into reality. And the more we start to play around with these universal laws, like the ones we talked about, the law of attraction, the law of duplication, the law of focus, the law of the harvest, the law of sowing and reaping, the law of compensation. These are all universal laws that are functioning all day long, and they're all geared around what we're lending our energy to, what we're focusing on, what we're thinking about, what we're obsessing over, and even the things that we're obsessing over that we're fearing or worrying about. We are drawing these things into us and creating realities and outcomes based on whatever it is that we have decided to dedicate our attention and our energy to. So if we become more selective and more intentional about the things we focus on, if we're a little bit more intentional about the types of social media that we allow into our thoughts and into our minds, into our mind's eye, if we're selective about the kinds of images that we hold in our imagination, we'll start to bring about these things in our reality, instead of just living by default and letting the evening news determine for us this terrible energy and frequency of negativity, which then is creating more of that, more results and more reality within our everyday life that is functioning on that same level of negativity. As we start to trim and become intentional about the things that we're letting in, the types of people we talk to all day long, the types of conversations we have with others, the things we watch and listen to, all of these things equal the overall energy and frequency that we'll be carrying within us every day, which will then give birth to this brand new reality of energy and thoughts and frequency and people and experiences and books and who knows what else will show up, just because we shifted and changed the energy. We shifted the focus. And that's what this whole visualization conversation is about. And that's why universal law is so important to lean into, to figure out how to use them. These are universal laws that are at work all day long, causing change and effects to be forced upon us just by virtue of what we're doing and thinking about and focusing on. And we can utilize these laws for our benefit. We can start to change them and have them work for us instead of working against us. A great analogy that we can use to keep this fresh in our mind is this. So if you have an idea of what your ideal future reality could look like or feel like, and you call that the bullseye of your target, and so you walk right up to that target and you pick up the target and you look at it and you really become clear about what the center of that bullseye looks like and what it would feel like to have that target in your mind, knowing that if my reality were happy and joyful and productive and loving and giving and caring, it would look and feel like this. Then we take our arrow and we stab it right into the bullseye of that target. And that is us intentionally creating and putting into motion this idea, this concept that we know what we want. And then we take that target, set it back down, and we tie a string around the back of that arrow that we've already put into the center of that bullseye. And we grab that string and we just walk backwards all the way back to where we were at the other end of the field. And we have this string in our hand, which is attached to the center of that bullseye where we've stabbed that arrow. And all we have to do is just keep a hold on that string, knowing that however far back we need to walk until we get back to our actual reality of where we're living and breathing every day. And we hold on to that string knowing that somewhere in the future, I'm not sure where, years and years down the road perhaps, is a target. And I know what it looks like because I painted it and I created it from scratch. And I fabricated it all. I made sure that I knew exactly what it would look and feel like in order to have that ideal reality. And I set that target down and I stabbed that arrow right into the center, and I knew and I felt it and it was real. And I tied that string around it and walked backwards. As long as I'm holding on to that string, all I need to do is just force myself to make hand over hand motions, just like we talked about with good, better, best, and allow myself to move slowly in the direction of that target. Even if I'm not directly on course, even if I'm not perfectly aiming right at it, as long as I'm holding onto that string, I'll be able to deviate a little bit, but eventually it's going to draw me in right where that target sits, and I'll be able to be holding on to the back of that arrow because I was intentional enough about stabbing that arrow right into the center of the bullseye that I wanted. And this analogy, this visualization, it can be really powerful for us because sometimes we find ourselves standing in the middle of a storm and we're holding on to a little string and we have no idea what it's attached to, and it's loose and it's not attached to anything, it seems like, and it's just flopping around. And that string represents something that we created perhaps years in the past. And we're just in the middle of this really frustrating moment and we don't know how to get out of it. All we need to do is just start pulling on that string until it gets tight again. And then we realize I have a firm heading in this direction. And even though everything's blazing around me and the storm's beating on me and the rain is pouring and the sleet and the hail and the wind, and I'm so freezing, if I can just make one hand over hand gesture and get myself a few more inches in that direction, I'll find that I am making progress and that I'm starting to see that target in the distance. And then once I see it in the distance, it gives me even more motivation that can be turned on within me. And I start to find myself making more and more progress in that direction. This is the analogy that I want you to take with you and really start to become clear about what that target would mean, what that would look like and feel like if it really represented your ideal reality, and give it a little bit more clarity. Lean into it and paint it in much more detail. What would it look and feel like on every level? Where would you be living? What would you be doing? What kinds of people would you be interacting with? What would your day-to-day activities look like? How would you be spending your time? What would your contribution to humankind be? How would you be extending that out to the world? Start to ask yourself these types of questions and give yourself permission to create that in perfect detail, what that ideal future reality would be. Because I guarantee there are plenty of aspects about it that would pertain to these ideal relationships, the ideal marriage perhaps, the ideal family that you want to have someday, the ideal relationship that you'll have with your mom or your dad or your sister or your brother or your nephew or your neighbor or your co-worker or your boss. These types of relationships can be changed and they can be shifted on a daily basis, even just from hour to hour, based on how it is that we approach them, how it is that we frame them in our mind, and how it is that we create and paint them into being entirely different from how they've been just because we gave them permission to change. So start to lean into how you can apply this analogy in your life and what you can do to give yourself permission to paint and create from scratch. And you'll start to notice that a new reality is showing up every single day because of how much energy and focus and frequency you're lending into the creation of this new reality that you want. Something else that's really fun to lean into is the 5 love languages. And it's a phenomenal book called The 5 Love Languages. And they have different versions of this book that can apply to the workplace, it can apply to a marriage, or even with kids, with your teenagers. And all it is essentially is helping people understand how it is that we communicate our love and affection for others, and how it is that we most easily and most naturally receive and interpret love from others. And essentially it's this. The 5 love languages are quality time, giving gifts, gifts from the heart, acts of service, meaningful service, physical touch, comforting someone physically, and words of support and affection. So to break it down, we're talking about quality time, gifts, service, physical touch, and words of support, words of affection. And as we start to roll through some of these, this might be a new concept for you. It might be unique for you to have approached yourself in this way and to ask yourself, how is it that I communicate love to others? And how is it that others communicate love to me that I understand? What type of language would someone need to use in order to communicate love and affection to me? And it might be pretty easy for you. You might be able to say that, oh, hands down, I'm quality time and words of affection, for example. And maybe somebody else is gifts from the heart and physical touch. And they might be able to nail down theirs really easily. For somebody else, it might be more difficult. Something that really helps to understand what our love languages are is to ask ourselves, what do we do willingly for others when we want to show them love and affection? If I'm really quick to jump at giving a gift, it might be that one of my love languages is meaningful gifts, gifts from the heart. Or if I'm really willing to step in and to shower someone with hugs and kisses and to really love on them with physical touch, perhaps that's my love language. And we can start to ask ourselves these types of questions to figure out and to get to the root of what is it that I do to express love to others. And if I can communicate that to them, then they'll know how they can communicate love and affection to me, where I'll be able to most interpret it and to most understand that it's coming from that place of love and affection. So in the activity that applies to this in your PDF workbook, we have a little section geared around the 5 love languages, and you can start to write down some of the things that you've done in the past to communicate love and affection toward others with these particular languages, and then start to give yourself a little score by how important each one is to you and how much you use that language in your life and how beneficial that language is for then interpreting love from other people. And you'll start to find which ones are leading and which ones are falling behind, and which ones you'll be able to notice are your love languages, which ones are strongest within you. And it might not be that you only have one primary love language. Maybe you have 2 or 3 that are primary for you, and you're a little bit more well-rounded when it comes to how you receive and how you interpret love and how you communicate love. But just be open-minded to whatever it is that works for you, and then start to communicate that to the people who are closest to you, so that then they can know how to communicate love and affection to you so that you can understand it. The reason why this is so important is because relationships, marriages, girlfriend, boyfriend, oftentimes people are just entirely missing each other. They're speaking a different language while the other person is speaking a different language, and they're not able to see eye to eye. For example, let's say this person's love language, their primary love language, is physical touch. So she shows up and she showers hugs and kisses and wants to hold hands and wants to snuggle, and that's the primary method of communication for this person. Meanwhile, the other person in the relationship is constantly showering with gifts, bringing home gifts and showering with flowers and chocolate, and there's always a gift around the corner, there's always something wrapped and always something very thoughtful. She's always finding gifts in random places, and that's this other person's primary love language. Meanwhile, this communication is going on and they're both doing a really good job communicating, but both of them are thinking the same thing. Both of them are saying, I can't believe it, he never holds my hand, he must not love me. He's not snuggling with me, he never gets close to me, he's never lovey-dovey, he's never hugging me, he's never kissing me. And the other person is saying, I can't believe it, she never buys me anything, she never gives me any gifts, she never showers me with her love, she never shows me she loves me, she must not love me. And this is going on all day long, and all it takes is for someone to stop that exchange and to let each person know that, hey, this person's love language is physical touch. If you want to communicate with this person, you need to meet them at their level and communicate that love and affection to them. Whereas with this other person, if this person wants to communicate love and affection to their spouse or to their loved one, they need to meet them on their level. They need to be willing to lean into gifts from the heart. And somebody might see it as, oh, that's so superficial and so vain and so trivial, I'm not going to buy a gift for them. But if that's their primary love language, then we need to learn to be flexible. We need to learn to compromise and to understand that if I don't speak Mandarin Chinese and my spouse does, I need to start to learn to speak Mandarin Chinese so that this person can understand me. Meanwhile, the other person in the relationship is speaking Spanish and just adamant that the other person learn to speak Spanish. It's just an example to help illustrate that if we're speaking an entirely different language, we are not going to be communicated, and we're not going to be seeing eye to eye. And that's a really beneficial moment for a marriage therapy session, for example. Let's find out what each other's love languages are, and let's start to understand what it would look like if we were actually communicating with each other's languages in the ways that the other person actually wants to be communicated with. That's when we'll start to notice that communication is happening, and that's when we'll notice that people are starting to interpret that love is actually being sent and received, instead of just thinking that it's a completely meaningless action that this other person is doing and taking part of every day. Instead, we'll see it for what it is, and we'll start to know that this is communication of love and that it can be met with mutual reciprocity. And that's the goal as we start to learn about these love languages and how they represent our communication one to another and what we can do to make them mean something that's actually beneficial and attached to reality. And if we're solution focused, if we actually can picture the outcome and to see what things would look like if we were on the same page and if we were meeting each other halfway and learning about each other's love languages, if we can have this solution-focused perspective, then it'll really help us to understand what it is that we're working towards. It'll give us more of a reason to be willing to compromise and to be willing to be flexible. And if we're not willing to meet this other person at the halfway mark, if we're not willing to compromise and be flexible on our end, it'll show, and it'll be obvious that we're expecting this other person to do more than their share, to come more than halfway. And it won't be fair, it won't be balanced. It'll really help us to understand that we can only come halfway. As solution-focused as we are, and as much as we want to bridge that entire gap, we're only able to come halfway. And if we can find ourselves having come halfway and just continue pouring into that relationship with understanding and love and affection, knowing that the other person will match that effort eventually. Because it helps us to not only get what we want, but what the other person wants, and what we want together as a team and as a unit, as a partnership. It helps it to benefit both ends of the spectrum, and it helps to grant the wants and needs of both parties, because we're finally meeting in the middle, because we're finally speaking each other's languages. Another analogy that's really great to take along with us as we talk about relationships and as we navigate relationships and how to heal and mend them is this concept of pain and how we address pain. Essentially, pain shows up in the body, whether physical or emotional, it's the same. Pain registers as a response from something injurious, something that happened that was this discord or a mishap or miscommunication, some breakdown, some hurt or some fracture. And the mind and the heart demand that pain be addressed. It demands that the injury gain attention and gain validation, regardless of whether it's physical or emotional. So what we have to do within the relationship when pain is present, we have to allow that pain to register as tangible, validate it, that it represents that something happened. We have to address the injury and find out how it's affecting the rest of the body and how it's affecting the rest of the relationship. We have to assess the situation and the surroundings. We have to isolate the injury. We have to immobilize the body. There are certain things that we do geared around a physical injury, and we treat emotional injuries entirely differently. But if we would treat more of our emotional and relational injuries the way that we treat a physical injury, there would be so much more room for healing and mending. Sometimes when somebody says, I'm just so mad, I'm so fuming, I'm so angry, I need space, I need time to think about it, I need to process this. The other person might not allow them to do that. They might think that it's unmerited or unwarranted, or they're not allowed to, or they shouldn't have to, and they add a bunch of meaning and assumption, when really that might be exactly what this person needs in order to begin the healing process, to just address the injury, to find out what's actually going on. With a physical injury, we're much more willing to take a step back and to pause everything, to look at it for what it really is, to bring in and enlist help, and to let other people come in, specialists even, and experts, so that we can figure out what needs to be done so that we can heal this injury properly. If we were to treat relational and emotional injuries in the same way, we would be much more willing to ask for help. We would be much more willing to give people space and time to address the situation and really interpret it for what it actually is. We would give ourselves permission to apply emotional or relational medicine. We would allow ourselves to walk around in a boot, for example, while our broken leg heals. Yet emotionally and relationally, we don't allow for the same types of healing processes. So one thing that'll really be helpful, and we have this visual in the PDF workbook for you, is the difference between medicate and meditate. And these two words are incredibly similar because of the introduction, this prefix of med. Med essentially means to measure, to wager, to calculate, to really think about, to look at, and to calculate in our minds what's necessary, what needs to happen. If we are medicating, it means that we're coming at things with a physical approach, we're bringing in medicine, we have our medical team, and we're utilizing all of our medical faculties and our medications. And these are all good things, these are all necessary for certain applications. But what we often do is we take a situation that requires meditation, the measuring and wagering and calculating of working from within, and we try and bring all of this medical attention working from without. And that's the massive difference between the two. Medication is literally working as a physician would to heal the body, but working from without, working from the outside in. Where meditation is literally the physician working from within to heal from within. So as you start to think about these two, and that yes, they both have their place and they both have their application. For a broken leg or for stitches, we have our medical applications, and we have all of our medical team to dive in and fix from the outside in, because it's an outside injury. Yet how often do we look at an emotional or a relational mishap and we approach it from healing from within? We approach it with tools and abilities and strengths and medicine from within. This whole meditative process of thinking about it and calculating what would be right. How's the best way that it is we can go about healing and mending this situation? And as we really start to think about the difference between these two, to medicate being to heal as a physician would from without, with coping mechanisms and tools and medications perhaps and other band-aids and things that are all surface, or approaching things as a meditative state, as an actual physician would, healing from within, using thought-provoking introspective questions, utilizing medicines that can heal from within, utilizing herbs and food, utilizing communication, proper facilitation of love languages, for example, being able to heal a relationship with nothing tangible because we approached it from within first. And that's the difference between approaching things with medication or approaching things with meditation. So consider the pain that's present in your life. Consider the relational pain or the emotional pain. Consider the pain that you have from something that happened when you were a child, when you were a teenager, when you were growing up, when you were just experiencing business for the first time, when you're just experiencing marriage for the first time. There are certain things that have happened at different places throughout our lives that are lending some level of pain still. And it's registering on some level of perhaps resentment or hurt or bitterness, some form of pain that's showing up for you, and it's registering on an emotional level or on a relational level. If we can approach it as if it were a physical injury, then we would be able to address it physically from the inside out, being able to meditate on it and really think about it and calculate about it. How is it that it's relational? How is it that it's emotional? How is it affecting me? And what kinds of things can I do to help it heal and mend from the inside out? And right along with this whole conversation would come our responses to pain. How it is that we respond to pain. For some of you, when you think about the fight or flight response, you think in terms of only one or the other. You think about either fighting and resisting and coming at it and placing blame, or running away, avoiding, numbing, coping. Yet there are so many different responses to pain. And some of them, just to kind of scratch the surface and find out what yours are, yeah, there's the fight mechanism, blaming, pointing fingers, assuming, trying to place all responsibility on other people. It's a really strong muscle for a lot of people. And then there's also the flight mechanism, trying to run away, being in denial about it, pretending that it never happened, trying to just entertain yourself into oblivion, trying to numb it, trying to avoid it, trying to medicate, trying to drink it away or drown it away, trying to make it go away somehow, pretending that it doesn't exist at all. There's so many different drugs of choice, social media, drugs, alcohol, sex, pornography. There's so many things that people engage in to try and numb and distance from whatever the pain is that's within them. Some people use food as a coping mechanism. Some people escape in a lot of different areas with entertainment, gambling, running away literally, finding themselves in a totally different geographic location, trying to leave all their baggage behind. Yet what we find is that as we're trying to numb and avoid and run away from all these types of things, we're finding that that baggage follows us. It shows up wherever we happen to be. Even if we find ourselves in paradise somewhere, we have all of our same baggage that we have to sort through because the pain finds us. If we don't address it and validate it and allow it to heal properly, it will continuously beg at us for the healing and mending that it requires until we actually address it and heal it. In all of these different responses that we can choose, some people choose to demonize the other person, criminalize the other person, put all the blame in their court, and to pretend that they had no hand in it whatsoever. And even if this is accurate, even if this is justified, we still have to be able to address it knowing that there is something that we can do. There is some level of responsibility that we can take in the whole equation, and that we can start to heal on our end and then to meet them halfway. Even if there's no willingness on the other person's part, we can still bridge our own measure of that gap, and we can utilize understanding and forgiveness to then fill the rest of that void. For some people, they try to elaborate the story. They try to make it seem like more of the responsibility belongs on that other side of the court. And for some, they create this incredibly elaborate lie geared around it all. Meanwhile, avoiding the responsibility that needs to be taken on their own end in order to heal from here to there, in order to find themselves meeting halfway that other person. And if they were just able to make some effort towards that halfway point, they might actually find that this other person was just waiting for something, waiting for some level of reciprocity, so that then they would feel that they had permission to move forward. Perhaps this other person has taken all of the responsibility upon them, feeling like they have done the only wrong in this entire equation, and they were certain that there was no blame on this other person's part. And it could be that just by making some step in that right direction would give this other person permission to then open up about it and to share how it is that they're feeling. This other person in the equation, the other person in the relationship, might be shouldering and burdening the entirety of the responsibility and beating themselves up for it unnecessarily. And meanwhile, we might even be doing the same. So just the communication about this situation might be what's necessary in order to lend a little bit of healing and mending in that direction. And with all these different ways that we can respond to an injury or to a situation or a mishap or some upheaval or some relational discord, the only one that's going to mend and heal is the intentionally focusing on the process of mending and healing, actually coming together, assessing the situation, being willing to embrace it for what it is. As bloody and fractured as the injury may be, relational, emotional, or physical, for us to be able to take it for what it is, embrace it, thank it for showing up, and then address it as something that we desire to have healed, that we want it to come back together, we want it to mend, and we know that it's going to be a painful process. All healing requires pain, no matter what the healing is. Whether it's physical or emotional, there's going to be some level of setting the bone, putting it in a cast, applying the medicine, sewing it back together, waiting for the healing reparation process. All of these things require some level of pain. And pain is not the presence of something evil or unnecessary. Pain is part of the healing process. Sometimes the anguish and the pain that we feel deeply on an emotional level or a relational level is simply evidence that we are coming back together, that we are finding a way of sacrificing and compromising and facilitating the healing process, and that it's going to take some level of pain for the healing and the reparation process to take place. So remember that and keep that in mind, that the healing process is not some pain-free, comfortable ride, that it's going to require compromise and flexibility. It's going to require effort of some kind, and that we can become willing to put forward that effort because we value the relationship and we want the healing to take place. So consider what kinds of injuries or what kinds of pain points are present for you, whether they be emotional, relational, or even physical. Symptoms and ailments that are showing up that might be attached to something metaphysical. There's a lot that we can dive into when it comes to how to customize this whole approach and make it beneficial for you within your relationships or within the relationship that you have with yourself. And if it would be helpful for you to customize more of this content so that it can be directly applicable with what you're working on, let us help facilitate that process. Feel free to reach out to us so that we can schedule a one-on-one session and start to talk about what relational pieces apply to the progress that you want to be making, and what healing and mending would look like for the things that are showing up as pain points or injuries for you that are not tangible and that are not physical. And perhaps they're showing up as some physical ailment or some symptom, but the underlying core is something that happened that was registering on a deep emotional or relational level. And as we dive into the rest of the videos within this relationship section, be open-minded to how all of this applies, everything that we've just gone over, about communication and boundaries and setting expectations and making sure they're realistic and communicating them, making sure that we're being selective and giving ourselves permission to be selective and intentional. All of these things have their place, whether it's with relationships within our home or relationships with ourselves or with our loved ones or with our coworkers. There's lots of different relationships that we have, and even associational relationships that are much more just touch and go along the way with people that we run into every day. Think about how these things apply to you and what can be done to heal and mend the types of injuries that have been happening within these relationships. So think about what you can do to implement some of these tools to be working from within, helping to heal and mend and to bridge these gaps and to bridge these relationships back together, utilizing some of the tools that we've talked about. We've helped to equip you with a few tools that you now have in your tool belt that you can use and you can turn to at a moment's notice when you have a very difficult situation in the future, and you might be in the middle of the most difficult situation you've ever had. Just know that it is navigable, that you can do this, that we believe in you. We understand that there are things that you need that we'll never be aware of, but if you can reach out to those around you, reach out to us, let us know what it is that you need so that we can help facilitate that process, facilitate this journey that you're on so that you can get to where you want to be. You can make progress toward those goals, and we know that you can. So believe in yourself, borrow this belief that we have in you, and trust yourself with the process. Know that you have assistance along the way, that God is on your side, higher power is on your side, your family is on your side, those around you are on your side, even if it might not seem like it right now. They want the best for you, and they're doing the best for you that they possibly can with what it is that they have right now. Just know that you are the source of your own change. You are 100% responsible and accountable for whatever it is that you want to receive or achieve in the future. And if you can own and embrace that responsibility and accountability, you'll find that it empowers you to then take those difficult steps, to escape those difficult comfort zones, to make changes, and to fill yourself up with jet fuel so that you can break through those atmospheric boundaries, so that you can see your struggles as opportunities to grow and to learn and to step up and be stronger. You can do this. We believe in you, and we know that you are now equipped with new tools to face your struggles, new tools and new abilities, new resources to face the things that are up against you. So believe in yourself and believe in the process, knowing that it is a journey and it's going to take time. And the only thing holding you back is the past you. So step into the future and give yourself permission to become the person that you know you want to become, to live the lifestyle that you know you want for yourself, the lifestyle that we all want for you because we love you genuinely and sincerely. And we hope with all of our hearts that you can learn to love yourself the way that you deserve to be loved. Because you are lovable. You are whole. You are complete. You are a divinely appointed chunk of this universe, and you are infinite. You are eternal. And there is no excuse or reason that could keep you from the things that you want. I know that with all of my heart. And if there is anything that we can do on our end, please let us know so that we can facilitate whatever steps are necessary for you to move forward toward what it is that you want and need. We want you to be as present for your family as you can possibly be, and we want you to always be pouring from a full cup. We want to see you brimming and overflowing with all of the things that you want to be given to those around you, knowing that you deserve to receive them first. For most of us, this is what we want. We want to be healthy, strong. We want to travel. We want to be free. We want healthy, lasting relationships. And as we grow older, we want to be able to feel and act younger. So then why is it that we're so far from that reality? Why is it that we find ourselves spending so many dollars and so much time and energy and attention on pharmaceuticals, medications, and surgeries? Why is it that we seek after the temporary Band-Aid fix? For millions and millions of people in America today, they're literally fighting for their lives on the forefront of this massive battlefield, and they don't even know how they got there. Even in today's information age, when we literally have everything at our fingertips, all knowledge, all resources available to us, but it's too much. We don't know how to sort through it. We don't know what to do with it. But it doesn't have to be like this. Aloha. My name is Bentley Murdock. I'm a holistic nutritionist, lifestyle wellness coach, and disease reversal specialist. And what I do more than anything else is I help people become crystal clear about what it is that they want their life to look and feel like, And then I help them make tiny behavioral and nutritional changes to then bring that lifestyle into reality. My wife and I created an online educational program called Healistic Vitality Fundamentals. Our fundamentals course consists of 20 comprehensive videos, and it's set up in a way so that people can approach it incrementally. They can go at their own pace so that it's more digestible for them. The 3 pillars of our course are, first, nutrition and physical nourishment; second, relational and associational peace; and third, mental and emotional harmony. Nutrition and physical nourishment covers everything that we eat, the nourishment we take in, the sleep, the water, the sunshine, the exercise. The relational and associational piece covers how we feel about and how we approach ourselves, a higher power, those that are closest to us, and everybody else. The mental and emotional section will be covering everything mental, psychological, emotions to feelings, anxiety, depression, the types of things that have to do with our mind, our heart, and our spirit. We've tested this course at Movara Fitness Resort and WellFit Zion, and currently at Red Mountain Resort and Spa, where our Healistic Vitality programs are headquartered. We've worked with teenagers, we've worked with marriages, we've worked with athletes, those in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s. So let's see if this course is right for you. There are 3 primary demographics for which we've created this course. The first would be the generally health conscious, those who understand prevention, who are already researching things. And the reason why this course would be for you is because you want that momentum to continue. You've spent so much time and energy, and you want to be able to continue adding to that. So let us do the research while you continue simply living your life and enjoying the benefits of having a healthy body. The second would be the average symptom collector, someone who's starting to see a lot of the warning signs show up and is perhaps taking medications and considering surgeries. If that reality sounds like yours, then this course is definitely for you, so that you can stop things in its tracks, keep things from getting any worse than they already are. And the third is the battlefield optimist. This is someone who is struggling at the front lines, battling for their life, literally, and fighting stage 4 cancer, fighting through multiple strokes or heart attacks. And if that's your reality, this course was specifically designed for you. Our deepest passion is to help people get back home, to bring people back home from the hospital to their families who love them. Our mission is to nurture sustainable healing and youthful vitality in the lives of all who seek for it, through comprehensive disease reversal education available worldwide. The question now is, do you feel that you're ready? And I honestly think that you are. I think you're tired of investing in things that can only give you temporary results. And if that's the case, then let's do this. Let's help you put both of your feet on that path to get you to the lifestyle that you know you want and need for yourself. The lifestyle that your family wants for you, so that you can then be more present and more able to be there for them. We know that you deserve to live a life that you love. We also know that the people around you deserve the very best version of you, and we want to help you give that to them. We know that you can do this, and we're here to help you every step of the way. So click on the link below, and I will see you on the inside of our Healistic Vitality Fundamentals online education course. Thank you, and mahalo.